زين والله ما يحتاج. We're okay.
هذا شباب؟
لا we're okay. We're okay.
هذا يعطيك.
إيه بس we're okay. مليون ترى ياسين حدلوني. So we're all ready.
People still loading on the system. We'll start in a few seconds.
No, it's okay.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome. My name is Paul Salem. I'm the president of the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm very pleased to welcome everybody to today's which is part of a series of one-on-one conversations with policy leaders from the Middle East, North Africa, and the United States. It's a pleasure and an honor to welcome His Excellency Dr. Anwar Gargash. Dr. Gargash is the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs in the UAE and also serves as a member of the Federal Cabinet in the UAE. This is positions he's held since 2008. Also, between 2006 and 2016, Dr. Gargash was the Minister of State for Federal and National Council Affairs. In addition to his ministerial portfolio, Dr. Gargash was chairman of the National Elections Committee, overseeing the UAE's first elections, which took place in 2006, and subsequent elections in 2011 and 2015. He's the chairman of the National Committee to Combat Human Trafficking, chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Al Uwais Cultural Foundation, member of the Board of Trustees also of the Emirates Diplomatic Academy, and leads the UAE team for the Human Rights Periodic Review. He's also served in several other positions as a member of the Emirates Media Establishment and a board member of the Dubai Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Gargash also is a fellow academic. He received his PhD from King's College, Cambridge, and holds bachelor's and master's degrees in political science from GW, George Washington University, here in Washington, D.C. Dr. Gargash, welcome to this webinar. I wish we could have welcomed you in our new headquarters, which we were able to build thanks to generous support from the UAE. You see behind me, although it's a virtual picture on Zoom, but our art gallery, which was holding wonderful shows until we had to shut down. So inshallah, we'll see you next time actually in DC. To the audience, thanks for joining us on Zoom, on YouTube, and our streaming platforms. I will be engaging Dr. Gargash in a one-on-one conversation for this 1 hour, but I'm always will be looking for your questions. You may submit questions at any time throughout the event by going to Zoom's Q&A feature. If you're on Zoom, go to the Q&A feature and put your question there. I will be keeping an eye on that. For those of us joining us on YouTube or on live stream or by phone, you can submit your question by email to events@mei.edu, events@mei.edu, or on Twitter using the hashtag MEI events. So let's get started. Dr. Gargash, thank you for taking the time from your very busy schedule.
Thank you, Paul. First of all, thank you. And you have a beautiful backdrop here that I'm just admiring. And it's great to see this venerable institution set in this in its current headquarters and able to really disseminate love and disseminate knowledge about the region, about the Middle East. And it's just great.
Thank you. I know in addition to your many other pursuits, you are an avid art collector. So inshallah, we'll get some of your pieces in the gallery soon. Okay, let's get started. Let me start sort of from the current crisis that the whole world is going through and ask you to give us an idea. How is the UAE coping, faring with the COVID crisis? What is the health situation as of today, both for citizens and expats? And what is the impact on the economy, and how's the government or the governments, both federal and local, dealing with this exceptional crisis?
Well, first of all, it's a global challenge. And, nobody can come and say that it is not going to affect them or it's not affecting them, because it has affected everybody. And the UAE is one of the most globalized of Middle Eastern countries. So definitely we're at the forefront here. However, I think we are managing very well. We've got today, I think we are close to 2.6 million tests out of a population of just under 10 million people. So almost, you're talking about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people have been tested. So the early preparation for this, I think, has helped us a lot. As soon as we saw developments and news coming out from the Far East, China and Korea and others, we realized that this is a pandemic. We did not naturally know what the dimensions of this pandemic will be, but we got ready very, very early on. And we put together, in my opinion, a very effective response, a response that depended on science and depended very early on testing and tracing, and at the same time, trying not to completely shut down the society and the economy, because we felt that a certain balance is required, because a public health issue such as this will have repercussions in many other areas. We're much more confident today. When COVID-19 started, it was quite a novel challenge. So, you had to learn basically as you go. And many of the steps that we took were the correct ones. Not every step we took was the right step, but overall, I think we did very well. And what we are really seeing right now, the last few days is seen as a decline in the numbers. And we are seeing also, because we are testing and because we are getting to the people that we need to get to early, the rate of mortality has been quite, I would say, low in comparison. Every human life counts. But again, I think what is happening right now is we are really getting to those people that need help much earlier. Having done all these things, I think we, like many other countries, are also addressing the economic impact. So clearly, this is an area where we have benefited from avoiding a total shutdown. So I see some countries that have done no shutdown and have been severely affected. And I've seen some countries that have totally shut down, and their numbers show that at the end of the day, you had to keep that right balance. I think overall, we started, when I say we prepared very early on, we had no problems with protection, we had no problems with masks, we had no problems with testing kits. And in fact, our support has gone to almost 70 countries where we had actually sent COVID-related gear and equipment and support, ventilators and masks and what have you. So overall, I think this remains a challenge. It's been quite a big challenge, like every other country. But I would say also that with planning, with allowing the science to lead, I think the UAE has done quite well.
And obviously the UAE has a very large expat community. Could you say a few words? Is it sort of the same approach to citizens and others? And how is that? I mean, all people often ask, so how is that being managed?
Well, I think this has been one of the advantages of dealing with this very early on. We sent a message that basically this is, you're a patient, regardless where you come from, regardless what your nationality is. And I think that has sent a signal for people who are living here, different tiers of society, rich, middle, poor, that this is a state that will take care of them. And as you saw recently in Francis Fukuyama's article in Foreign Affairs, it's about state capacity. And I think the UAE today has built that state capacity in terms of its healthcare, its response to emergency, in terms of sending the right messages to the very, very sort of plethora of nationalities that live here. So they've all received the message that, you know, you are a patient, you are an individual, you will be treated the same way, you will always be a priority. So definitely these are things that we have taken care of. And I think this messaging also in a time of pandemic helps with social cohesion. And I think this is one of the things that we have seen in the UAE. Mm-hmm. Again, regardless, you will have job losses. I mean, this is part and parcel of this. So you would have also a certain number of people who would want to go back to their respective countries. And, you know, we've facilitated that. Some countries have been very good in receiving their citizens. Some countries have had much more of a problem in receiving their citizens. But again, nobody's really left the UAE unless they want to. Nobody's really been told you have to leave because you lost your job or because this or that. And what we've done is we've extended visas, we've extended residencies, we've extended a lot of work permissions, etc., because these are unusual times. And I'm very, very proud on how my country, I'm talking here as a citizen, is handling this with, I think, the right balance of professionalism and rationalism, and at the same time, a humanitarian urge.
Thank you. I want to go to the economic question that you obviously mentioned, and the UAE being one of the most globalized economies and countries in the world. Obviously, there's big short-term impacts. Expo 2020 canceled, you know, conventions, tourism that was really vital. But given that in many quite potential scenarios, this crisis and its impacts on tourism, on big conventions, big gatherings, might have a long tail, as they say, that could go on for 3, 4, or 5 years before people are fully comfortable going to huge gatherings, travel as much as they did last year. So I know there's clear short-term impacts, and as you say, it's a capable state, so it can move quickly. But how is the change in, and maybe the medium-term change in the global economy, the impact on several sectors in the medium term, how is that changing the planning process? And how is the UAE looking at the next 3-4 years, given that this is not going to be over, you know, just, you know, in a month or 2 or 6?
Again, Expo was not canceled; it was delayed. It will be held next year, and I think it will have, you know, in my personal opinion, a certain importance as a major event post-Expo. So I think it's even more relevant that it'll be one of the big events right after Expo. Having said that, after the COVID, having said that, I have to say that it's too early to tell, first of all. But beyond that, I think I have great faith in the agility of the UAE. I have great faith in the capacity of the UAE. And then again, you have to see that the UAE is being hit like everybody else, but the UAE remains, in my opinion, a central pivot to the region's economy. So clearly, whether you have a high tide or you have a low tide, you still have that central pivot as a logistical center, as you know, what I would call quite a trailblazing economy, and so on and so forth. So again, I have to come and say that things will change because we are part of a globalized world, and we're one of the most globalized Arab countries. We will adjust. We will be affected in certain areas. We will have to do certain things in different ways. But again, this is a tide that has, this is a low tide that is not just affecting the UAE, but affecting the whole world and the region. And from that angle, I think the UAE is central. It will be at the forefront of global post-COVID recovery. It will be at the center of regional post-COVID recovery. In some areas, in my opinion, we will have to do things differently. In some areas, things will go back almost to the way they look. We know that we will have quite a challenging year this year and next year. And I think business, government is bracing for that. Because you also have to see, and I think you recognize that very well, with COVID, global recession, there's also been a drop in oil prices, and that also affects us. So in my opinion, all these things are calculations that we are taking into consideration. I just have a lot of faith in my country. I have a lot of faith in our resourcefulness, and I believe that we will adjust. But where and when and this, I think this is already up for discussion everywhere in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Gargash. Let's turn to foreign affairs, which is your portfolio. The founder of the UAE and the current leadership are known well for having long-term visions. And my question is, how would you describe currently, not the vision itself, but how does UAE's foreign policy, both globally and regionally, link to that vision? In other words, what is the UAE foreign policy trying to achieve for the UAE and for its vision? What are its goals? How does the UAE define its interests in the region and in the world? And what strategies, what grand strategy, as it were, animates your foreign policy?
Again, Paul, I start with the concept that this is a changing international system. And you cannot be in the same profile of a traditional Gulf country with all these changes around you. So you have to be more activist. It's not because you want to be more activist, it's because you have to be more activist in order to support and help preserve stability in your region, and in order also to help and maintain prosperity in the region. So I would say that the UAE is activist not because it chooses to be an activist state. It is an activist state because the world is changing around us, because the fundamentals that the international system depended on 30 years ago, 20 years ago, are no longer as more than stable as they were. So that's the first thing, the recognition that we have to be active, we have to play a role. Now, the second important part in the UAE's also a view is that we don't work alone. The UAE is not large enough and doesn't have, in my opinion, the overall gravitas to work alone. We work with friends, with like-minded friends, whether these friends are in the Arab world or whether these friends are international players, such as our main strategic ally, the United States, and others. So we try also to work with a vision of stability and prosperity. So that's a very important also component. The third important component is the Arab dimension of the UAE's foreign policy. We have seen basically, what I would call unbelievable interventions in Arab affairs by countries such as Iran, recently such as Turkey. So the UAE believes that, look at the case right now in Iraq with Iran, Iranian incursions on one side, Turkish incursions on the other side. So clearly we have to stand here with Iraqi sovereignty. So for us, that Arab dimension of our policy is extremely important. We look at ourselves in terms of numbers, etc., we might be a medium-sized Middle East country in terms of population, but we are a very large Middle Eastern country in terms of economy and in terms also in what I would call soft power. So for us, we recognize that unless we can get a group of friends and like-minded countries together in order to work together on issues of stability, on issues of radicalism, on issues of prosperity, we will not be able to operate. And the old model of a Gulf state where you try and not rock the boat and you try and just get by, I think the international system doesn't allow you anymore to play that role. So as we move forward, I think we recognize that not just because of COVID, the region is not going to change drastically. People are not going to change their ambitions and political plans, etc. But we hope that because of COVID, we will actually see a more rational approach with de-escalation, etc. So although we expect that regional players will still try to expand their political influence, their geographic reach at the expense of the Arab world, but we also believe that these need to be addressed through collective Arab political position. It doesn't actually mean that we are calling for counter-aggression or so on and so forth. So I think these are important. Now, having said that, the UAE also believes that we are, we can't also be completely consumed by issues of the region. If we are completely consumed by issues of the region, other parts of the world are going to be on a different plane. So clearly, we really do need to look at the science and technology. We have to have these stretch target as our, recently, online, our nuclear plant in Baraka has come online for electricity, etc. And at the same time, our space program, our interest in artificial intelligence, we feel all these things are actually an important part of this, of where we're going. You cannot just deal with the region and deal with the current situation. You also have to be ambitious. You have to look forward. You have to understand that you are also competing with many of the tigers in the Far East and so on and so forth. And you need to learn from them and you need to be agile and able. So I think it's a combination of all these things together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Anwar. Tons of questions coming in from the audience, and I will integrate them as we move along. Obviously, many of them are about the region and the different crises and conflicts in the region. But let me ask first about sort of the UAE's global relations. We're here sitting in Washington, D.C. Obviously, the US-UAE partnership is old and deep and strong. But I want your views on how you see that relationship, given that the US itself has gone through some shifts in its foreign policy approach. There's been issues, in terms of attacks in the Gulf and relations to the US, and a lot of turbulence inside the US. So sort of a general question about the US, but also at the same time, I want to ask you about UAE's relations with the other big powers, namely China, Russia, EU, and India, which is a close player to you, I know. So situate the UAE a bit in this new multipolar world, where the relationship with the US is special, but there's many other players.
Again, I think like any country, balancing all these relationships is not an easy task. But at the same time, building what I would call building confidence with many of these different partners is essential. So I say the UAE is working on both angles. On the one hand, trying to balance as much as possible, and I'll deal with the different relationships, but at the same time, building also this sort of reservoir of confidence and reservoir of transparency. And I think on this, we have done very well. So every single country that you mentioned actually has great respect for the UAE and for the UAE's position. They will always tell you, you might disagree with the UAE, but you know that what they speak about in a closed room is what they will talk about in an open forum. So I think that confidence and transparency is something that we've built with all the different entities you mentioned. Now, the United States is our single most important strategic partnership. And sometimes people, when they think of our relationship with the United States, they just look at the sort of political military angle. But this relationship is really much, much wider than that. It is in business, investment, in soft power, in the presence of institutions such as NYU Abu Dhabi, in people like me who spent some of the best of years of their lives in America and others. So the United States, we recognize that there is always, or there has been for a while now, an internal debate and dialogue about the US policy overseas and in the Middle East. And we follow that keenly. And all I want to say is we want America to remain engaged in the region. I think that is an important part. I would say Russia has become a very, very important also player in recent years in certain issues that are important to the region. Definitely, you've seen the OPEC Plus deal, and the Russians are a major part of that deal of stabilizing OPEC prices. You're seeing the Russians as an important player in Syria. So clearly, you do have certain Arab regional considerations here. And for us, building a relationship also with Russia for these reasons is very important. China is an emerging power. And clearly, our relationship with China is mostly right now economic. I mean, if you look at everybody in the region, most probably they will come and say our main strategic partner is America, our biggest trading partner is China. Mm-hmm. So you will see that dichotomy here. And clearly, for us, it's more technological, it's more business-oriented, etc. How will this develop? It'll depend a lot on how Chinese foreign policy really develops globally. On the EU, of course, we've got very good relations with, one of our best relationships are really with countries like France and Germany and the UK, now out of the EU. But these are our, sort of trusted, older relationships that we want to keep and build also a new network. With India, we've had a huge breakthrough with the Modi government. I mean, our relationship with India is always been great. You've always, you've had 2 million Indians living in the UAE, but the sort of what I would call bigger really picture is something that many Indian governments did not comprehend prior to the current Modi government. So again, I think this is an area where we have built a good relationship with India. And India today is a major emerging economy. It's a major emerging power. And I would say that we have really, crossed a lot of stages in building what I would say taking a good, normal relationship and giving it a strategic edge.
Thank you. Let's move to the very complicated regional situation, and let's start at home, as they say. The UAE itself is a federation, and it was a founding member, obviously, of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which for a long time was a rare, successful example of fairly close cooperation between a sub-region in the Middle East, a region which has very little cooperation. But obviously, the GCC right now is, there's a deep split. So I want you to talk a little bit about your, Arab Gulf states relations. So that would be, obviously your main, I suppose, partner, ally and so on is Saudi Arabia. And so if you talk a bit about that relationship, where you agree, where you may be differ, how you work together or not, and talk about the crisis or dispute with Qatar. Is it getting any less acute? Do you see any way forward? And does the GCC, how does the GCC still exist? What elements still exist? What hope do you see for it?
Paul, I would say that the GCC is moving forward, but limping. It is moving forward, but it's limping. And why I say it's moving forward, because I think the common market that the GCC created, the ability of people to move and to own companies, to invest, etc., is really the parts that is moving forward. The part that is limping is perhaps the greater political integration we were looking for. Saudi Arabia is actually handling the crisis for Qatar. With Qatar, we have full faith in how Saudi Arabia handles that crisis. And what we know very clearly is that the recent proposal by Saudi Arabia, which was, in my opinion, very firm, very good, and would have really set the stage for a more stable decade to come. Apparently, the Qataris refused it. So clearly, we are back to where we were. Our main relationships in the GCC are excellent. Our strategic working relationship with Saudi Arabia is unprecedented, really. We consult. We are our most important investors to each other. We're the most important business partners. We talk a lot about political views and political files and etc. So I think that's moving very well. Our relationships with other GCC countries is very good. I think you end up really with Doha's crisis, and it really depends on what they want to do with it. I've said publicly that we don't really want to spend too much time on it. I think when the Qataris are ready and are willing to do some sort of self-analysis of where they went wrong with their policy, I think the doors will be open for their reintegration. But that is one thing, but you cannot also resolve an issue on the surface and have another crisis in 6 months' time or a year's time. But I feel personally that we might have lost some of the momentum in the GCC, but I feel certainly that many of the economic gains of the GCC, the common market, etc., is really giving us this sort of headwind right now. But again, we have to address the political issues. Today, for example, on a wider scope, I was just looking at numbers, and 1.5 million Arabs live in the UAE, and about $10 billion of money is basically money that goes from these Arabs to their families, etc., and to various Arab countries. So clearly, it's not only a political relationship. The UAE and other GCC countries also play a major part in basically supporting other Arab economies, of employing other Arab citizens living here, etc. So clearly, the link here, I think, is very, very important. It's not only a political link. Now, part and parcel of the UAE's approach, and I have to say we haven't always been very successful, is to try and work very hard with Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and Bahrain and other Arab countries such as Morocco to try and create what I would call a center of moderation in the Arab world. Because clearly what we have seen in the last 20 years is expansion, political expansion, geographic influence by Iran, and now we're seeing it by Turkey in many Arab countries. And this is part of our approach.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm getting tons of questions, and let me lay out the next half hour basically and reassure some of the people asking questions where their questions will show up. So I want to talk obviously about the three big non-Arab powers in the Middle East, Iran and Turkey and Israel, Palestine, and that issue. And definitely getting a lot of questions on Yemen and on Libya. And I also want to get your views on Syria and Lebanon as well. So in the next 26 minutes, that's what I'll try to cover. Let's start with Iran. The UAE has, I would say, a complicated relationship with Iran. They're your close neighbor. They're your large neighbor. There's actually, a number of Iranians in the UAE. There's trade in some sectors. And yet, it's a very difficult, lot of threats. Let me ask a couple of questions about that. Given that the U.S. has been a main player vis-a-vis the protection of the Gulf for the Arab states, putting pressure on Iran or negotiating with Iran, how do you assess the current U.S. approach to Iran, and how does it impact the UAE, this maximum pressure, the escalation that we saw particularly in 2019? Do you see any imminent more risk happening, or do you see any potential for de-escalation? What is the UAE trying to do with Iran?
Again, I have to say that it is in the interest of everybody to de-escalate. I mean, we all have to be clear-eyed and say that we have a major issue of global significance. And this is not going to go away unless we create a process to resolve this issue. So while we do that, it is important for us to de-escalate. It is important for us not to escalate the current situation and go into a confrontation. I think that is major. Having said that, I think clearly the countries of the region, the Arab countries of the region, don't believe that the 2015 JCPOA was an effective formula. Clearly, we were not part of the process. We were never involved. When we tried to join in very early in the process, doors were shut down for us to be part of the process. And I think that hurt the process rather than supported it. I think Iran understood the 2015 agreement as a carte blanche for it to play the role of a regional power. I think it is important that we go back on track for a political solution that will actually address the issues that are, the three important baskets that we always talk about: nuclear, missiles, and at the same time, regional policy. Now, will this work? Won't this work? This will take a lot of doing, to be honest. But to pretend that we can all go back to the 2015 JCPOA agreement, I think is not realistic right now. So I'm sure that there are ways that we can all talk about JCPOA plus, for example, of trying to do things, add things. I think the carrot to Iran should be that any process should allow Iran to be part of a region of stability and prosperity. I think it is important for us to have a prosperous Iran, and Iran that is invested in the stability of the area. Currently, as I said, I don't really see the elements there. But I think the apt handling, when you see something like that, is to try and de-escalate, to try and put more ideas on the table, to try and support these ideas and to build a process. In my opinion, I keep repeating a process because I don't think some sort of summit is going to resolve it. The issues are too complicated. There are issues of confidence building measures. What I know very clearly is that this time around, countries like ours, countries like Saudi Arabia should be part of this process. If we're really talking about resolving this issue of Iran's relationship with the region and the relationship with the United States and with the world, I think we also have to think that we need to to have something that is more permanent. To have something more permanent, it means that there has to be our input also as part of what is going on.
Thank you. Let me move to Turkey. Turkey obviously is one of the G20 countries, is a very vibrant economy, has some integration with Europe, has many elements where you would say the UAE and Turkey might agree on many things and might have a lot of common interests. And for a while there, the relations were excellent, but now they are in a very bad way. I want you to reflect on that or explain that a bit. And is the acute sort of difference with Turkey, is it over the Muslim Brotherhood and what happened in Egypt or Muslim Brotherhood elsewhere? Is it about sort of neo-Ottoman, just as a Turkish Ottoman kind of thing with interventions in Syria and Iraq that you mentioned? Arab countries should not have interventions from others, or is there something else we're missing? And I get it that the relationship with Iran is very, very complex, but you would think that there should be a pathway to improve relations with Turkey, and if so, why is that not happening, do you say?
I recall a conversation, I think it was 2012, between Sheikh Abdullah and Ahmed Dawood. And Ahmed Dawood at the time was the foreign minister of Turkey. And I was present, and Sheikh Abdullah had done a poll about Arab youth perception of different countries. And he told Ahmed Dawood and told him that I'll send you this poll. And Ahmed Dawood asked, how is the perception of, with regards to Turkey? And Sheikh Abdullah said it was very positive. I don't think that poll will give us the same results today. I would venture and say that the major problem is basically the weakness of the Arab world. The weakness and of the Arab world has encouraged many of the regional players to think that they have what I would call strategic space in our region. And so I would say before the issue of political Islam and before the issue of the new Ottoman views or an Erdoganist, sort of claim to regional order or whatever. I think the main issue is you have this area and countries feel that they have done well economically, or their militaries are important, or they have leaders that are over ambitious, and they feel and say, look, we've got a weakness here. And we can project that sort of strategic depth and strategic strength because of the weakness of Syria or Iraq or Libya or this or that country. So I would say that this is a major problem here. I think when Turkey started thinking of itself more as a pan-regional state, rather than thinking of itself as a sovereign state in the borders of the Atatürkist republic, in my opinion. So I think this is what we saw. And as you said, I mean, the UAE today is perhaps one of Turkey's largest trading partners in the region, just by virtue of having two very dynamic economies. But today, in my opinion, Turkey's current Arab policies are not sustainable. They are not sustainable. They are opportunistic. And in my opinion, as I said, political Islam might be part of it. This new Ottomanism might be part of it. But fundamentally, the idea that we've got a weak Arab state system and we can, show more influence, and we can show more, we can push basically our borders, even though not geographically, at least politically, southward and eastward, etc. I think this is what's been encouraging these things.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask about Israel and Israel-Palestine. The UAE maybe, favored some kind of engagement with Israel, maybe under the logic to encourage it to be more reasonable and more moderate and so on, and to build on the promise of the Arab peace offer or peace deal offer of 2002, that if you give a fair deal to the Palestinians, then we can discuss general peace with the Arab countries and normalization. However, whether it's domestic Israeli politics or decisions made by the Trump administration or a combination, we've now reached a very extreme point where the U.S. Backs basically the rather extreme right-wing position of successive governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu, and we are apparently on the verge of Israel annexing large parts of the West Bank. Now, I know that the UAE is publicly against this position. The Ambassador, Mr. Utaiba, published an op-ed, a strong op-ed about it. My question is, how do you assess the UAE and maybe UAE and some of its Arab partners, that bet or that approach towards the Trump administration and towards encouraging Israel in a certain way, and comparing it to where we are now, and what might the UAE position be? How will they support the Palestinians if and when the annexation just goes ahead without any deal?
Again, fundamentally, we are part and parcel of the Arab world. We are supporters of a two-state solution. We are supporters of the Arab peace plan. Our position is not going to veer away from what I would say consensus Arab position here. We're not a country that borders Israel. So clearly the main decisions are going to be with the Palestinians, with the Israelis, with the countries that border Israel. Having said that, there are two important remarks here. We have said that whenever there was a dialogue, we have achieved something. Whenever there was no dialogue, nothing was achieved. So clearly, our lessons are quite clear that the Arabs have actually achieved some sort of agreements along the way whenever there was a dialogue. But whenever there was no dialogue, solutions that were possible in the 40s are not possible in the 50s. What's in the 50s is not possible today, and so on and so forth. So we are really calling for dialogue. Vis-a-vis the annexation, I think Ambassador Yusuf Al-Attiba's column is quite good advice and good warning, really, that this is a major issue, because ultimately I personally believe that if we are going where we're going today and we lose the possibility of really implementing a two-state solution, we will really be talking about equal rights in one state. Now, that is my personal view of these developments. But as I said, on the macro level, the UAE is part and parcel of an Arab consensus, but the UAE is very clear by saying that what has not worked before, we don't need to repeat it. And what has worked really in terms of the Arab history with Israel and with the Israeli-Palestinian issue is you've always had agreements when there was dialogue, when you had channels of communication. I mean, again, you had all sorts of agreements. I mean, Sadat's initial concept was not only Sinai. He ended up only with Sinai, and so on and so forth. But clearly, I think this is what encapsulates the UAE's position.
Let me turn to the Yemen and Libya, very difficult, very tragic situations, particularly in the Yemeni case. So let's start with Yemen. And actually, I'm going to add on, there's a lot of questions from the audience on Yemen and a lot of questions also next to Yemen, the Horn of Africa, and the UAE's policies in the Horn of Africa. But let's start with Yemen. That was maybe the first major UAE adventure, as it were, outside militarily. You have since generally pulled out as of last year. I know you've been partners with Saudi Arabia in the Riyadh Agreement, which doesn't seem to have really panned out or hasn't worked fully. There's a number of questions and issues about the South itself, the STC versus, the Hadi government, who's in control of Aden, all of that. And then obviously the bigger question of the Houthi-controlled areas, negotiations there, the influence of Iran, and the efforts of Martin Griffiths, the UN rep. It's a whole bunch of issues. So give us your assessment of the UAE's, adventure, presence, whatever you want to call it. What is current UAE policy towards Yemen, both on the political security side, but maybe more importantly on the humanitarian side?
First of all, let me correct you, Paul, and say that this is not our first engagement abroad. I mean, we were in Afghanistan for a decade fighting AQAP.
Yeah, my fault.
We were part of the UN stabilization program in the Balkans with our military in Kosovo. We were in Somalia in the darkest hours fighting al-Shabaab when nobody else was engaged. And we were part of the NATO effort to unseat Colonel Gaddafi. So we've always been really part, and as I said, we never act alone. We're always
and you were part of the alliance against ISIS in Syria for a while.
And part of the alliance against ISIS in Syria. Yeah. So I think this is something that comes from also what I had said earlier. Our worldview is that the international system is changing. And if you cannot really add value, it will affect also your own ability to involve your partners in your own stability. So that I think is an important one. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I would say in Yemen today, we've got less than 100 soldiers on the ground in Yemen. And the majority of these are basically in counterterrorism and against AQAP operations. Okay. There is no reason today why the Yemeni parties don't actually engage in a political process leading to peace and stability in Yemen. What we are really seeing today in Yemen is the Yemeni parties trying to build their own advantage and perceive that they can improve their position. The Saudis have come with a fantastic plan through the Riyadh Agreement and have engaged the Houthis, and there is a UN process. Currently today, I would say it is all in the hands of the Yemeni politicians, whether these politicians are the Houthis or whether they are the government of Yemen or whether they are the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Islah, or the other STC and other Southerners. What is happening right now is each party is trying to add to its advantage and thinking that by gaining a few kilometers here, they will be better off. And unfortunately, this is just prolonging the battle and the human suffering today in Yemen. I have to say that today, Saudi Arabia is putting a lot of effort, as the UN is, in order to get the Yemeni parties around the table. I would say the responsibility today is wholly in the hands of these Yemeni parties. They can come today and say, we will abide by the Riyadh Agreement on the one hand, we will accept Martin Griffiths' proposals on the other hand, we will accept the coalition's also call for a ceasefire. Right now, what is happening in Yemen, it's prolonging the conflict through the Yemeni parties by believing they can improve their advantage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And humanitarian support and efforts?
Well, again, I think this is continuing. The Saudis have been really epic in supporting the humanitarian effort in Yemen. We have been supporting Yemen also. I mean, if you really look at what are the countries where our foreign support has gone, Yemen has always been there since the inception of the UAE in 1971. So that will continue, and it is continuing. But you really do need right now a signal. You need a signal from the Yemeni parties that war is not the course. You know, gaining another city, another province, another town is not going to do us any good anymore. That let us move right away to the negotiating table. It is really there in their hands right now.
Mhm. I'm going to jump to Libya and then come back to the Horn of Africa. So obviously, a lot to talk about in Libya. The UAE was supporting, as far as we can tell, obviously General Haftar, along with maybe Egypt and others. There was an escalation and attacks towards Tripoli, an attempt by General Haftar to sort of win militarily. But then a bunch of setbacks and retreats. And now we're in a situation, maybe partly through Turkish support and other dynamics, that General Haftar's project, which was very costly in terms of escalation of conflict, now is obviously doesn't seem to be in very good shape. UAE, I mean, Libya is far away from the UAE. Yemen obviously is a neighbor and all of that. Again, how do you assess the experience there, and what is the UAE's current way forward after everything that's happened?
Again, why are we in Libya? I mean, again, you can't press a country on and press a country off. You can't come and say, we need you to topple and protect the Libyans from Gaddafi, and suddenly say, okay, we don't need you anymore. You're involved. There is an issue of legacy, and the UAE was actually the largest Arab contributor to the NATO effort at the time where Colonel Gaddafi's militias or forces were attacking Benghazi, and there were worries about a human massacre because of that. So you can't just turn it on and turn it off. At the same time, I think we had a major concern with various AQAP, ISIS, other radical groups converging on Libya. And I think this has also kept us involved there more politically. Again, we don't act alone. In many of these places, you see the reports and you see the UAE this, the UAE that. The UAE is part of a group of countries that see eye to eye on Libya. We're very close to France's view. We are very close to Cairo's view. Recently, we've had countries such as Greece and others that have been concerned also with their own issues in the Eastern Mediterranean. Having said that, right now, the main issue in Libya today, it's a swinging pendulum. And I think what Turkey doesn't understand today is that getting 100 kilometers here or 200 kilometers there is not going to end the crisis in Libya. This is a swinging pendulum, and we've seen this pendulum go up and down, east and west, many times before. Right now, Turkey is the only country objecting to an immediate, comprehensive ceasefire. And the next battle over Sirte is really problematic. You've got worries of 60,000 to 100,000 civilians in that coastal city. And the Turks are pushing their advantage. But then again, we've seen this before. We've seen it with General Haftar pushing all the way to the capital. And we have, we've always said that some of our friends have taken their own unilateral decisions. And we've seen it with the STC in Yemen. We've seen it with General Haftar in Libya. And a lot of these unilateral calculations have proven wrong. But these are calculations that sometimes you don't really have the control or the sort of moral advice that you want on some of your friends. So the UAE believes strongly that in Libya today, another big Turkish onslaught will not resolve it. What will resolve it is three things you have to address in Libya. Number one is an immediate comprehensive ceasefire right now. And, if the GNA was saying, we don't accept because Haftar, had certain lines, he has to go there. He's beyond those lines. So that argument is no longer there. The second thing is a resumption of the political process. And the recent Egyptian initiative, the initiative by the head of parliament, Aqila Saleh, are all encouraging signs. And the third thing is really control of the money. And what has happened in Libya is that the distribution of the oil wealth has meant that Libya has been self-financing of its own civil war. The money comes in, it's distributed to everybody. You ensure that the war is just self-financed. And I think this is a vicious cycle that needs to be broken.
Thank you. With your permission, I'd like to extend the time a bit because there's so many fascinating topics to ask you about. And I do want to ask about the complicated area, Horn of Africa, very interesting. An area where the UAE really has been kind of thinking towards the future, as you said. You have ports in Somaliland and Puntland, but maybe difficult relations with the government, maybe in Mogadishu. You have a lot in Ethiopia, good relations there. Relations with Djibouti, a little bit complicated by differences over the port, and very good relations in Eritrea. And finally, and these are all questions also joining in from the audience, always a lot of questions about Socotra, which is, you know, an interesting island out there. So give us your view of what is the UAE's presence strategy in the Horn?
You know, sometimes you hear, you know, a lot of this sort of propaganda about the UAE trying to control this port or that port. And so, you know, my answer is, you know, it will, you know, if we control the ports you say that we need to control, such as the port of Eden or others, it'll take 500 years to recoup our investment, you know. So, I mean, let's really put things in perspective. Let's talk about the Horn of Africa. I think number one, we have a historical relationship with the Port of Africa, with the Horn of Africa. We came into Somalia to help in what was basically a counterterrorism operation and the counterterrorism efforts of helping Somalia at the darkest hour. This was a time where nobody wanted to do anything with Somalia. So clearly, I think that we were there when nobody really wanted to do anything to do with Somalia, because we believe that with counterterrorism, it's a web and it's all connected. You can't think of counterterrorism in terms of borders. You can't think of terrorists in terms of terrorists who are stationed in one country and will not go to another country. So I would say that the historical part is important. Yes, the UAE is very interested also in logistics, because part and parcel of the success of the UAE has really been its ability to, it's not only oil, it's business, but it's also the business of logistics. So clearly, we believe that a country, landlocked country like Ethiopia, of 100 or so million people, cannot be served by one port. I mean, it is ludicrous to think in those terms. A country like Ethiopia can be served by many, many ports. So clearly, I think it is legitimate for companies like DP World, which is, by the way, a commercial entity, to start thinking, how do I operate in India? How do I operate in the Horn of Africa? How do I operate in Latin America and the Far East, etc.? So the logistics part is an important part here. I would say that the political consideration is important, but it really comes after these considerations. The historical link, the logistical link, and then the political link. Again, you know, this important breakthrough that Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed achieved between Ethiopia and Eritrea is something that he felt was just the right time. So he, you know, he's very modest about it, to be honest, because I've asked him about it, and he said, Anwar, don't overplay it. We saw an opportunity. We had friends here in Eritrea because of the Yemen war, and we had friends in Ethiopia, and we thought that this is an opportunity to bring these friends together. So I think this is extremely important. With the Farmajo government, once they didn't want us there because of Qatar and Turkey and others, you know, we left. We left, and, you know, we've spent many, many years really helping Somalia against, you know, personally, I was involved in various issues in supporting Somalia in trying to bring together Somalia and Somaliland in previous governments, etc. So I would say that, to try and sort of magnify what the UAE is doing is perhaps overstretching what our political plans and capabilities are. Of course, we do want a horn that is more stable, and we want to help and support. And I think we've done that successfully with the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the UK and Sudan, and with the EU, of course. And we've come at a very critical time to try and ensure, and we said at the time, it's not about what sort of government comes after this Islamist dictatorship. It's really about how stable the transition is. And we actually put our money where our mouth is on that one. So clearly, the issue of stability, the issue of counterterrorism and extremism resonate with us. But I think what is extremely also important is the way that we have been sometimes pictured by very, I would say, hostile narratives is not accurate. Sagatra is a case in point. I mean, again, Sagatra is a soft spot for the UAE. And traditionally, many of Emirati sailors going to East Africa, and including Omani sailors going to East Africa, have always, sort of transited in Sagatra before continuing to the Far East. And as of that, we've always helped Sagatra. We've always helped in water wells, in electricity projects, etc. In I think it was 88, they had a huge cyclone, and the UAE came in a big way to support it. Now, if I believe all the reports that I read, we want to make Sagatra into our 8th emirate, okay? And of course, this is all nonsense. This is all nonsense. This is, again, an issue of many of the Yemeni parties, such as Al-Islah and others, not really addressing the major issue in Yemen. The Yemenis have to sit together and resolve the issue, because right now it really is in their hands, rather than create stories here and there.
We've taken a lot of your time, but in my final round of questions before letting you go, I would like your views on 3 complex countries. Egypt, how do you see the situation there? What is the UAE trying to achieve? Obviously, they're now in the midst also of the COVID and economic crisis. But then I want to end with your views on the situation, which is bad and getting much worse in Syria. Obviously, it's already been very bad, but the Syrian lira is completely collapsing. Things look to be getting much worse. And next door, the almost complete collapse in a country you've visited many times and you love, I know, Lebanon. A multiple collapse, economic, fiscal, monetary, political, and now health. So I want to end with those 3 complex cases. How do you see Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, and UAE's efforts in any of those countries?
Well, again, for us, Egypt, we always say that we really want to see the effective reemergence of the Arab political order. And to create that, you have really 2 poles, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. We are all part of that notion that for us to move forward politically, economically, we do need to recreate really the Arab political system. And to recreate the Arab political system, you cannot do it without Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So clearly, the success of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, the stability of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and the leadership of Egypt and Saudi Arabia is essential for us from that perspective. And as I said, we haven't been completely successful in this call, but we haven't lost faith. And when you mentioned regional players, the first thing I said, it's the weakness of the Arab political system that attracts the regional players to prey on it. And from that perspective, I think we have a vested interest in a successful and effective Egypt, whether regionally or domestically, from that perspective. I think in Syria and Lebanon, Lebanon, in my opinion, is what we are seeing today is really a combination of Lebanon losing its main message. Lebanon was always supposed to be a conduit between the East and the West. And, you know, the open economy, the sort of entrepreneurial Mediterranean flair, and the sort of conduit cultural and business and economic. I think with the radicalization of Lebanese politics, such as Hezbollah and others, that really has undermined it. And with that, of course, you have major domestic issues that the meltdown that we are seeing today is a meltdown of that's been really waiting to happen. And unfortunately, in this myriad of crises that we see around the world, we're not really seeing much appetite to really address that. And I think Lebanon's collapse is going to be perhaps more difficult than supporting Lebanon now. But unfortunately also, Lebanon is also governed by a certain color right now, by a certain group. There is no consensus really on what to do. And I think this is a major issue. Vis-a-vis Syria, you know, as you know, we're very concerned. We're very concerned because, number one, we've got to end this decades-long war. And I think it is something that is really hurtful to any Arab, where the three countries that decide the fate of Syria are not Arab countries, whether they are Russia or Turkey or Iran. And I think this has been part and parcel of the UAE's message, that it is important for us to create the Arab role in Syria. And I personally think that the Arab decision to eject the Assad regime out of the Arab League, with hindsight, was the wrong decision. Today, we have about 9 Arab countries working in Damascus at different status there. But again, the Arab influence in Syria is very marginal. Now, to combine that, the sudden collapse of the Syrian economy and the Syrian lira, and this is, I think, somehow also or partly connected to what we see in Lebanon, is another warning sign. But I think deep down, as I said, fundamentally, it's about rejuvenating the Arab regional system. If the Arab regional system is weak, then nobody is going to take us seriously. If the Arab regional system is seen as something that you can take advantage of, then countries around you will take advantage. And I think the faster we are able to rejuvenate this Arab system in a 21st century mode, then I think the better off we are.
Thank you, Dr. Anwar. This really has been a rich and very fascinating conversation. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being so clear about so many difficult and complex issues. I look forward to welcoming you again here at MEI in Washington, D.C., and to visiting you in the UAE, inshallah, soon. I hope you and your dear family are well and remain well in the coming months, and wish you all the luck. To our audience that joined us on Zoom and joined us on YouTube and other platforms, I tried to include as many of your dozens of questions that I could. I hope you found the conversation useful to you. Thank you for tuning in, and inshallah, we'll see all of you very soon. And thanks again, Dr. Gargash.
Thank you, Paul. And I just want to say that for all the viewers, please let the UAE speak for itself. Let its, forward-looking agenda speak for it, and think of it as a successful example of an Arab state in a very difficult region. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all. Bye.